A lot of time when I interact with the people who have diabetes, they have many, concerns, many apprehensions in their mind. And one of the very common apprehensions which they have is about what cereal can they have in the meal. So, oh, I have diabetes, so I cannot take rice. Oh, I have diabetes, so I cannot take bread at all. So, somewhere I feel I want to clarify on these apprehensions which people have. Talking about meal, in my last series, I mentioned that in totality, being an Indian, forget about the fact that whether we are diabetics or we are not diabetics, just being the fact that we are an adult Indian, I think we all need to ration our carbohydrates. And I also said that carbohydrates you get from variety of foods. You get them from your chapati, from your rice, from your pao, from your noodles. You get them from your dals. You get them from your starchy vegetables. So these are all sources of carbohydrate. Now, there are two questions and two things which are very, very important to be reasoned. One is the quantity. It's the quantity of carbohydrate which I'm consuming at a given time. That is very, very important for a diabetic. So, for a diabetic to take a wise decision, it is very important to place that carbohydrate in that plate, keeping in mind that it should occupy only 1/4 part of the plate. So when a diabetic is looking at the carbohydrate, he or she should be concerned about the quantity, that is one. And how do I reason out what is the quantity which I take? It's always best to look at your plate and make sure that carbohydrate is occupying only 1/4 of the plate. And when I say 1/4 of the plate, I repeat myself, and I think I did mention in my last series that the remaining 3 parts of the plate are very, very important to allow this carbohydrate to work well. The first part is my protein, the second part is my fiber, and the third part can be my pulse. So, in totality, what I'm looking at is more of fiber, more of protein, and less of the cereal which I'm valuing for the major carbohydrate intake. So, we come back to the question, can I consume rice? Yes, even being a diabetic, you can consume rice, but it is important what type of rice do we consume. So we would say normally you should have a rice which has more of fiber. So we are looking at brown rice, or we are looking at parboiled rice, a rice to which a heat treatment has been given, as a result of which there is a change in the structure of the starch, and such a rice does not spike up the sugars so much. So we call them as a low GI rice. But all said and done, whether we take a brown rice, whether we take a low GI rice, or whether we take chapati, or whether we take bhakri, or whether we take bread, the most important question for a diabetic to be addressed is the quantity which we take at one time. So, we ration our quantity, number one. We decide how much depending on our age, our sex, our physical activity, the insulin which we are taking, or the drugs, oral hypoglycemic drugs which we are taking. All this needs to be kept in mind in terms of ascertaining how much carbohydrate do I need in a day, and then it is important for me to divide this carbohydrate in my important meals throughout the day. And I would say the important meals would be your breakfast, your lunch, your snack, and your dinner. So whenever I'm placing a carbohydrate in my plate, I make sure that I couple that carbohydrate with good amount of protein, with a good amount of fiber, which is coming from my salad, which is coming from my vegetables, not starchy vegetables. Like I said, that if I'm consuming potato or if I'm consuming yam, it is as good as consuming one chapati. So I don't equate that as vegetable. So I look at my cereal, I look at my protein, I look at my fiber in my plate, and if I justify my balance, I will never go wrong, even though I'm a diabetic, because I will never go wrong in terms of spiking my sugars high. So we have to be prudent to kind of decide the composition of my plate, keeping all these things which I mentioned in mind. And I would say that you can have a variety of cereals. It's not that you cannot have bread at all. It's not that you cannot have rice at all. It's not that you have to have only chapati. But yes, on a scale of 10, the frequency of consuming bread can be once or twice a week. Frequency of having rice can also be 2 to 3 times. But what is most important to be kept in mind is A, if I'm consuming bread, I should be looking at a bran bread. And if I'm consuming bread for a meal, I must support that bread with adequate amount of vegetables, good amount of protein, and the quantity of bread which I consume is small, is limited. Similarly, if I'm looking at rice, then I go for a rice which has a high fiber. So I look at brown rice. I can even experiment by cooking the rice, cooling it and then consuming, or cooking the rice, keeping it in the refrigerator and using that rice, because there is a process called retrogradation which happens, which brings the glycemic index of the rice lower. There's a change in the resistant starch content of the cereal, the starch containing cereal, and thus the spike in the sugars caused are relatively less. On the other hand, if I'm looking at millets, very good idea. I could take bajra, I could take jawari, because they are fibrous, they are coarse, they are less refined, or I may be taking wheat. But all said and done, whether I'm taking jawari, bajra, ragi, wheat, rice or bread, the most important question is the quantity, and within the quantity I should improvise on the quality. That means any cereal which I consume should inherently have more of fiber. That means it should be less processed, or it should be fortified with fiber. And in addition to this, on my plate I should have a lot of fiber, a good amount of protein. So I'll never go wrong.